Okay, I think that's it. Excellent. So welcome everyone. I first want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Christine Oblock. I'm the Clean Water Federal Field Director for Environment America, and I'm very glad to be with you all virtually. We're excited to have an array of guest speakers, all speaking to the importance of investing in our country's water infrastructure. We'll have our guest speak first, and then we'll hold for questions at the end. However, you can use the Q&A function to ask your questions ahead of time or post them in the chat if you're joining us on Facebook Live. Obviously, infrastructure touches virtually every aspect of American life, and we're going to focus today on how it affects clean water. Americans overwhelmingly agree on the need for clean water, but with billions of gallons of sewage overflows reaching our waterways and lead contaminating drinking water for millions of people, our water infrastructure is failing us. Fixing leaking sewage lines, preventing stormwater runoff, and replacing lead pipes are just 3 examples of measures that will lead us to cleaner water. To address these threats to our health and our environment, we're going to need to make bold investments to repair and renew our water infrastructure. It's clear that clean water protection connects all corners of the United States, but today we'll be focusing specifically on a few examples of where our investments in water infrastructure have already been working. Last week, Environment America released a report highlighting examples of successful water infrastructure projects across the country. We'll be hearing a bit more about the impacts of some of those projects in local communities. So I'm going to start off by passing things to Kate Bryman, who leads Environment America, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm Kate Freeman. I'm the Director of Environment Maryland, and I'm super excited to be here. It is my honor to get to introduce Jenna Eosa, who's the Executive Director of Blue Water Baltimore. The report that Christine mentioned highlighted an infrastructure project here in Baltimore at the MedStar Harbor Hospital. And Jen's going to talk more about it, but Blue Water did an incredible project of retrofitting 4 of the hospital's major parking lots with green community, a 20-year veteran environmental nonprofits and state government. Jen has served in her current role since June 2017 and first joined Blue Water as a former board member. Prior to joining Blue Water, Jen served as Vice President, Director of Conservation Programs at the Chesapeake Conservancy, and Director of Policy and Planning Research for the Maryland Department of Planning. In her free time, Jen enjoys volunteering at Patterson Park, cycling, and gardening. Jen, thank you so much for being here. I am going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kate, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Kate said, my name is Jen Eosa, and I'm the Executive Director at Blue Water Baltimore. And we are the regional watershed organization in Baltimore City and County, Maryland, that's focused on restoring and protecting the health of our waterways. We are also the home to the Patapsco River Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper program. Baltimore is a really interesting old city on the east coast of the U.S. That very early in the 1900s decided to separate their sanitary and stormwater pipe networks. Unfortunately, though, maintenance has not been a priority since then, and so we now have 2 parallel systems that are extremely leaky and are sending amazing quantities of pollution into our local streams and rivers. Climate change in the Mid-Atlantic region is increasing our annual rainfall and creating flashier, heavier storm events that are contributing to localized flooding, urban heat emergencies, and more pollution than we can deal with. Maryland is part of the Chesapeake Bay network, and as such, all the states in the region are working toward improving pollution reductions to meet a total maximum daily load for the Chesapeake Bay. So in 2017, we embarked on a project with a local hospital, MedStar Harbor Hospital, to do something radical with their campus of over 12 acres. We spent time with the hospital's green team and their consultants, and we came up with a design that would include over 11 practices, microbiome retention practices, small rain gardens, bioretention, and tree plantings. We effectively removed more than a full acre of impervious cover and treated more than 5 additional acres of imperviousness across this 12 or 13 acre campus. The project was completed in 2018, and it has really served as a demonstration project, not only for the local neighborhoods, but also for the healthcare community, because MedStar Harbor Hospital was very cognizant and very much a leader in connecting public health outcomes with environmental health outcomes. And so we now have beautiful functioning landscapes, bioretention facilities that are filtering hundreds of thousands of gallons of stormwater before it flows previously untreated into the middle branch of the Patapsco River. It's been an amazing partnership among a lot of funders, the hospital, Blue Water, and other service providers. And it's now standing as a really beautiful example of how stormwater management can be done in a way that is both in harmony with the environment, that reduces flooding, reduces urban heat in the summer, and helps to improve public health outcomes.
I was trying to write down that last quote you said because it just stuck out to me so much of how a project like this can do all of those things. So I'm just really, that struck me. I guess, Christine, I will turn it back to you. Thank you again, Jen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. It's so exciting to hear the on-the-ground impacts of those projects. And we're going to go to Jenna Stevens from Environment Florida next.
Thanks so much, Christine. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Stevens, and I'm the State Director for Environment Florida Research and Policy Center. I'm so excited to be here today to introduce Justin Bloom, who's going to be discussing the infrastructure projects that have happened in Roberts Bay. I think this is a little bit of a different project that will be discussed than other ones during this webinar because this project is incomplete. Roberts Bay is still an impaired body of water. So we're also going to hear a little bit about what still needs to happen to truly clean up Roberts Bay. Justin is the founder of the Suncoast Waterkeeper. He got his JD at Tulane Law School and has been a practicing environmental attorney specializing in prosecuting pollution cases and representing communities for over 18 years. His experiences include investigation, enforcement, and litigation of Clean Water Act violations and toxic tort cases. He has successfully represented many plaintiffs affected by the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and other oil spills in the United States. Prior to returning to the Suncoast of Florida, he worked in New York City as a Waterkeepers Alliance's Eastern Regional Director. Justin's family first came to the area in the 70s, and he also attended New College, where he graduated with a concentration in environmental studies. Thanks for being here today with us, Justin.
Thanks, Jenna, and thanks, Jen Eosa, for the great work you guys are doing in my hometown of Baltimore. So, yeah, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about the Roberts Bay project that Jenna mentioned, but as she mentioned, that's a work in progress and really a smaller project that, though very successful, is one of many projects that needs to be done down here. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the approach that the Waterkeeper organization down here has taken, which is a bit different. And you guys probably have some waterkeepers in your watersheds that do similar type of work. But with this project, Roberts Bay, where it flows into Sarasota Bay, or it's part of the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. And especially this time of year, you might like to think about beautiful beaches. And the beach closest to Roberts Bay is Siesta Beach, which is every year it's ranked 1, 2, or 3 as like a top global beach. And it truly is beautiful. And the waterways here are incredibly beautiful, but increasingly polluted. We have seen decades of recovery from the 70s when, mainly due to sewage infrastructure, the lack of sewage infrastructure, we lost seagrasses, we lost habitat, harmful algae blooms. And we've been in recovery. Our indicator is seagrass for the most part, and we've seen improvements. But in the last several years, we've seen increasing amounts of nutrient pollution in our waterways, decreases in seagrasses. And a lot of that, I think, is being more and more connected to the failure of the wastewater infrastructure, and to also related to that is the stormwater infrastructure, which down here, like in Baltimore, is separate. So this project in Roberts Bay was pretty cool, and it was expensive and funded by Sarasota County, which is a fairly wealthy county, and was able to afford, with the support of federal funding and local funding, to really focus on reducing nitrogen and phosphorus and solids to improve water quality in Roberts Bay. And we've been able to really kind of see the difference, cleaning up the waterway. But as I said, in this region, we're regressing, and we're seeing die-offs and increasing severity of red tides and other harmful algae blooms. And I think, like what was mentioned at the top, or maybe I think it was Jen mentioned, with climate change, we're seeing increasing severity of storms down here. Sea level rise is raising the groundwater levels and complicating the efforts to maintain properly functioning sewage and stormwater infrastructure. What we've really been focusing on is using litigation to address some of the worst offenders. Municipalities down here, like throughout the country, are not doing as well as they should in maintaining aging infrastructure. Here, particularly with the sewage infrastructure. So we've, over the last 4 years, brought some pretty significant cases in this region, Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, suing the city of St. Petersburg after they released millions of gallons of sewage into their local waterways. They were the worst violator in the state of Florida for the entire summer. I think that was in 2017. We looked at the reasons why, and it was really failure to maintain their infrastructure, and a state agency that was reluctant to enforce environmental laws and the requirements in their own permits. So where there was a failure of the state and the federal government to enforce, we used our citizen suit provisions of the Clean Water Act, and in employing aggressive advocacy to force them, ultimately having to resort to litigation. And after years of litigation, we succeeded in getting them to clean up their system. It's going to take years, but they've committed hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. And it's not municipal governments and elected officials. They would rather have their name on a piece of art or a pier or a park or something like that. Infrastructure, sewage systems are not sexy. But we're finding more and more, I think, that there's the political will and an increasing understanding of the population, which I think we all help in bringing about by educating, that these are really important investments. So we followed that case with another one in the St. Pete area against Gulfport. We're successful after litigation. And then in our backyard, we sued Sarasota County, where Roberts Bay is located, after we discovered that they had major failures in their largest sewer treatment plant that resulted in about 1 billion gallons of wastewater being released into the main feeder, Philippi Creek, that goes into Roberts Bay over the course of about 9 years. And they were keeping it secret. Nobody knew about it. It was partially treated wastewater. Our litigation resulted, again, in their commitment to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade that infrastructure to advanced wastewater treatment. And now we're suing the city of Largo near Tampa for similar situations of an aging infrastructure, their inability to address some of the treatment infrastructure that's been failing. And again, part of the problem here is a lack of will of local, state, federal regulators to enforce the provisions of permits or environmental laws. So that's been our approach. We support some really cool projects like the one that was highlighted in the report by, governments that do good work. But I don't think that it's enough. And especially now that we're going to be seeing increasing declines in revenue, we're going to have to be creative in making sure that these infrastructure projects are adequately funded. So that's probably, one of the tools in the toolkit that we've been employing. But thanks for the opportunity to share that with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to keep moving along. I already have questions for you, but we're going to hold, like I said, and then I'm going to pass it to Bridget in Missouri to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you everybody for watching. I'm Bridget Sanderson. I'm the Director of Environment Missouri Research and Policy Center based out of Kansas City, Missouri. We did make a wide swath to include Missouri in the southeast states, but depending on where you are in Missouri, you might think you're part of the southeast, my bad. Anyways, so I am so excited about this report, and especially one of the sites that was highlighted in our report called the Middle Blue River Basic Green Solutions Pilot Project. It's a long one, but I was so excited because this pilot project is actually just right down the street from my house. And so I was able to reach out to my city councilwoman. Unfortunately, her schedule didn't work with ours. And so we did get a little bit of a video about this pilot project. So City Councilwoman Rayna Parkshaw lives in the 5th District with her husband, Michael, and her three children. She is a former union member, successful small business owner, and longtime healthcare executive. Rayna has served as a board member of the Missouri Hospice and Palliative Care Board of Directors. Outside of her career in healthcare, Rayna works to reduce unemployment as an Eastern Jackson County Workforce Development Board member. She's a volunteer with the American Heart Association, National Alliance for Mental Illness, Alzheimer's Association. Rayna attends St. James United Methodist Church. She's a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and the Greater Kansas City chapter of the Links Incorporated. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Missouri State University and a master's degree in healthcare services administration from Southwest Baptist University. So now I'm going to go ahead and share this video for everyone. I do apologize. The beginning of the video is a bit quiet, but okay, that looks good to go. Let's hear from City Councilwoman Rayna Parkshaw.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councilwoman Rayna Parkshaw, representing Kansas City, Missouri's 5th District. I'm happy to see that my district's green stormwater infrastructure project was highlighted in Environment America's report, A Path to Cleaner Water. As a city councilwoman, I have focused on blight in my district and worked hard to improve the health and lives of my constituents. This pilot project was the first of its kind in Kansas City. This project beautified the area with native plants, rain gardens, and permeable sidewalks. All of the systems for the project helped to capture stormwater at the site instead of flooding our combined sewer system. It helps to keep sewage overflow out of the neighborhoods in my district while protecting our drinking water systems. This was an excellent community project that boosted community pride, and I look forward to more projects like this in Kansas City that help in protecting our clean water. Thank you for allowing me to join you today.
All right. So that is one thing, unfortunately, about Kansas City, is that we do have a combined sewer system and it is an aging infrastructure. So we have a lot of work to do out here in Kansas City. But next up, I have a dear friend of mine, Chris Cardwell. He actually helped maintain the pilot project that we're talking about in Kansas City. Chris is a native plant professional raised in Central Kansas, beginning a career in contracting in 2008 with Applied Ecological Services. Chris went on to launch his own native landscaping company, Greenhand, in 2013. In 2018, until recently, Chris has served as a program manager for Bridging the Gap, one of Kansas City's environmental nonprofits. Under contract with the KC Water, Chris's team of technicians were responsible for the maintenance of over 300 green stormwater infrastructure sites across the KC Metro, including this one that we're talking about. And he also helps administer a residential cost share reimbursement program for Johnson County, Kansas stormwater. Chris currently works as an urban conservationist with Miami and Johnson County Conservation Districts in Kansas. So Chris, thank you so much for coming. I'd love to hear from you.
Hey, thank you very much. Is this hearing okay? Great. Well, again, thank you for having me back to join the conversation with Environment America. It's always such inspiring and reinforcing conversation when we see the work that we're all doing on our own that's all serving the greater purpose. Again, Bridget and Councilwoman already alluded to the fact that Kansas City is unique from our first two examples in that ours is a combined sewer system and predominantly dating to 100 to 110, early 1920s at the latest. And not only that, but Kansas City has one of the larger infrastructure footprints of any community, and particularly per capita. There's enough water line distribution pipe in Kansas City to stretch from New York to San Francisco, over 2,400 miles of it. And there are nearly 3,000 miles of sewer line in a city that has a very large footprint per capita. So add all of that just sort of overwhelming volume of infrastructure to maintain with a lower tax base, and then exacerbate that with the aging challenges that all of our communities are facing. So middle blue, predominantly, the Blue River is Kansas City's urban river. Its watershed is contained entirely within the metro area of Kansas City. So it provides us a really great window into the ecological health of our watershed. And when we become targeted as problematic, challenged watershed, that then indicates that there are local issues that need to be addressed. And that's not unique entirely across the country. We know that 90% of our water infrastructure assets are owned locally. Water is a municipal asset, and it's managed in a local setting. So Kansas City, Missouri was faced with not only a challenge, but a decree, EPA consent decree, to reduce combined sewer overflows. And many of our cities around the country are experiencing similar situations. So this provided great challenge, but also great opportunity. So the middle blue, unique in that the neighborhood itself was able to be selected based on the fact that it was a CSO area within the city, and that, as is the case predominantly, combined sewer overflows are not happening in the nicest parts of town, in the most well-served or most high tax-based communities. And that aging infrastructure is most neglected in communities that are neglected in other aspects of the social policy that we work with. But because it was an isolated sub-watershed within our combined sewer, we were able to implement, KC Water rolled this program out and built this out. It was contractor maintained within this neighborhood for 3 years, at which point Bridging the Gap developed a workforce development and operations and maintenance program to serve under contract for KC Water. And as Councilwoman mentioned, you know, the beautiful thing about green infrastructure in this particular pilot was the ability, as is the case with most green infrastructure, to reach all of the potential co-benefits and to cast the net for this capital project as broadly as possible. So we see benefits of social justice. We see the localized environmental beautification and the enhancement of the local ecosystem in a previously ecologically degraded and polluted neighborhood. These green infrastructure systems trap enormous volumes of litter that are maintained regularly, that keeps out of the storm systems and keeps out of the neighborhood. Additionally, the permeable sidewalks that were mentioned in this report, I want to say almost I won't misquote the number, but long stretches of permeable sidewalk, not just as a replacement to aging sidewalk, but as the first sidewalks ever put in a majority of this neighborhood. And so crossing over the transportation and mobility indicators of a neighborhood and how that then applies to public health and engagement with the natural world we see that a green infrastructure capital project like this one from the ground up has a lot of opportunity to have benefits outside of simply improving, in this scenario, local combined sewer overflows and ultimately watershed health in the Blue and then Missouri watershed. So although we are not in the Southeast, that large body of water to the west of West Florida is the receiving water for our wastewater as it goes into the Missouri watershed. So we're all connected, as we know that in the water world. And we were able to see just by social measure and neighborhood engagement that this community was served beyond the environmental scope, and just to the particular details of stormwater management and pollution management. The fact that this is one sub-watershed in which this infrastructure was implemented, we can take very precise measurements, and we're seeing that this neighborhood stores almost 300,000 gallons of stormwater, which is a reduction in peak flow, one of the key factors in combined sewer overflows, able to reduce peak flow in this neighborhood by something like 70–75% or more. And those are direct results. That's a one-to-one. This is your front yard, your unflooded basement, your not combined sewer overflow in your neighborhood park. So remarkable example of what can be done. And it's the first in a long series. The path to compliance for a consent decree is a very long one. And Kansas City has really done a great job up right now. And there are current capital projects taking place that could take up another 2 pages in a nationwide report on success stories.
Thank you so much, Chris. I very much love how you brought it home that, we're all combined together. We're all downstream from sub-buddies. So thank you again for coming on and discussing this and giving us your expertise. Christine, I'll go ahead and send it back over to you.
Yes, it was definitely a point that I was going to make. There's never an isolated water. If you are upstream, it will end up somewhere. So you definitely qualify as being in the Southeast region for that point of view. I do want to just pause quickly, and I know that one of our speakers, Jen, is going to have to leave. So I just wanted to take this moment to be able to thank you for taking the time to speak. And we just really appreciate that you were able to provide your expertise. So I just want to be sure to say that before you hop off.
Thank you so much, Kate and Christine. I got to say, I'm very excited now to read this report, and I think this has been a really awesome experience for me. So thank you so much for
All right.
I think Jen might have frozen. Maybe she'll come back. But for anyone watching, if you check out Environment Maryland's social media, we've tagged Blue Water Baltimore on all of our posts. So you can click, go to their social media, go to their website, and learn more about the great work that they do.
Excellent. All right. So we are slowly making our way around the region, and our next stop is going to be North Carolina. So I'm going to pass it to Krista Early to introduce our next speaker.
Hey there. So like Christine said, we're in North Carolina. I'm the Clean Water Advocate with Environment North Carolina Research and Policy Center, and I'm actually super excited to be on this webinar with all of these fabulous speakers. So the report that we are all talking about right now actually highlighted a story in North Carolina that focused on the Flat Swamp. It's a case study to show the value of investing in clean water projects. So Parmel is actually the location that's sitting on the Flat Swamp waterway. And unfortunately, that area is suffering from aging sewer systems, just like many of the other stories we've heard about so far today. This area, or this Parmel actually initiated 3 sewer projects to improve their water quality and to protect their public health. I'm super excited to be joined today by Frank Siegel, who is a North Carolina business consultant, who has the ability to talk about why clean water is actually really important to the bottom line of many businesses in North Carolina. So right now, I will pass it over to Frank.
Hey, thanks, Krista, and thanks everybody for having me. It's great to be part of this conversation today. So I'm a business consultant here in North Carolina, and I specialize in trying to help companies become more profitable, figure out how to improve their processes and help them grow and help them show a higher bottom line. So today I'm going to talk about the effect of water on business and, especially on small businesses. But I'll start it out with a small clip about a recent company that I did do some business with, which was a local car care startup based in Raleigh that had national operations. And so this car care startup was providing mobile wash and maintenance services. So they would drive to your house or to your rental car lot if you were a rent-a-car business, and change your oil and wash your vehicle. And so you can imagine on the wash side that the company used quite a bit of water. So they'd be loading up these trucks with up to 100 gallons and have to refill them a couple times a day. And we had a large operation here in this part of the state, as well as 20 other markets all over the country. So, thankfully we didn't need to treat the water per se, but we were cognizant of the fact that water came at a cost, and it was not an insignificant cost for us. And depending on which market you were looking at, places like, we operated up in the Northeast as well. It was a bit more expensive and it came at a higher price. So being a startup, startups try to show their investors that they're making money and becoming profitable. So any impact to the bottom line definitely affected the company's ability to try to raise money and gain buy-in from other investors. And so we were aware of the fact that, that there were some water issues, for example, here in Raleigh, with some combined sewer overflow systems that, affected some sanitation issues in some of the lakes, rivers, and streams around here. We were cognizant of the fact that if there were, more treatment services, provided by the municipalities, that could have a potential to raise the price of our water supply. So it's definitely something we talked about here, but car maintenance is boring. Let's talk about beer. First and foremost, because it's Friday afternoon, but also because North Carolina, believe it or not, is one of the biggest craft beer industry states in the country. So, and as most of us know, beer is mostly water. So a quick stat here is the beer industry in North Carolina comprises about $9.2 billion with a B dollars in GDP per year. So it's a very significant chunk of our economy here. We've got, we're home to Asheville, North Carolina. I highly advise you take a trip out there if you've never been. It's beautiful. It's nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's always a top contender for Beer City, USA, year after year. So coming back to beer, and I'll come back to Asheville here in a second. Coming back to beer, like I said, it's mostly water, and we know that microorganisms are responsible for making essentially what's barley tea into beer. So those microorganisms are very much affected by the quality of the water. So, for example, if you have a high amount of sulfates in the water, you'll see a more astringent taste in the beer. If there's too much chlorine from overtreatment, you'll see a medicinal off flavor. And then if there are high levels of bacteria, you will, you'll see a lot more spoilage and shorter shelf life. So ultimately, the beer industry is very aware of this. And a little example of something that's, a water treatment issue that's happened in the past is with a company called Oscar Blues. So Oscar Blues is one of 3 large breweries, and I know there are actually several more, but one of 3 large breweries that recently built a second headquarters in North Carolina. North Carolina did a lot with tax incentives to try to bring the brewing industry over here. And they all located in and around Asheville, North Carolina, which is one of the reasons it's become Beer City, USA. But Oscar Blues was headquartered out in Colorado. So these large beer companies set up shop over here so they can increase their distribution up and down the East Coast. And one of the first things that Oscar Blues brewers noted when they started producing was that their beer in North Carolina did not taste like the beer in Colorado. And so this was an issue. Being a large brewery, consistency is key. So they hired a group of scientists and did some digging to figure out what was going on. And what they found out was there was a high level of chlorine in the water that they were using. This was, a result of a higher level of pollutants in the rivers and streams that they were pulling from. So the municipality, kind of countered that with more chlorine, right? So that gave them an off flavor. So what they had to do, on top of spending money, hiring people, trying to figure out what the problem was they had to make the water into they had to change the pH and change the structure of the water and filter the water and take the chlorine out before they started brewing beer. So that required a large investment in a large filtration system that allowed them to start pumping out beer that tasted like the beer out in Colorado. So Oscar Blues is a very large company. It's really not a big deal for them to figure this out and solve this problem, but for a lot of smaller businesses, and there are many, many small breweries in and around North Carolina, it does become an issue. It becomes a barrier to entry. And these businesses are either, stuck with producing lower quality products or spending more money on trying to make their beer a higher quality and then really seeing a lower bottom line. So higher costs with stagnated revenue just equals, lower profitability. So that's a big issue that a lot of these companies have around here. And North Carolina, folks on the call are talking about the issues there. I mean, North Carolina does not come without its own issues as well. I talked about the sewage issue right here in Raleigh, North Carolina, with some combined sewer overflow systems. In the news, I'm sure people might have heard about Duke Energy and coal ash spills, which pumps out a higher level of mercury, arsenic, and some other toxins into the water system. So that's an issue for businesses to try to have to figure out how to bring their water supply back to a normal level and take those toxins out. We're also one of the largest hog producing states in the country, and hog waste lagoons, every time a hurricane hits, and hurricanes hit more often now than they used to, every time a hurricane hits, at least 5 or 10 of those hog waste lagoons will overflow and get into the water system. And that presents issues with fisheries, with tourism, and overall business health in the state of North Carolina. So that's really my quip on the North Carolina and business impacts here. Crystal, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Way to
Go
bring
ahead.
it home.
Yeah, thank you so much for your remarks, Frank. It's been great having you on this call. I will pass this back over to Christine.
Yeah, definitely like that the beer highlight on a Friday afternoon. That is exactly appropriate. Theme of the day: water infrastructure invests and impacts everyone. So I first want to just thank everyone for joining us today, and then I want to be sure that we get a few questions in for some of our panelists. So I know we're down one panelist, but we have a few questions for some others. I wanted to start by asking you, Justin, you mentioned that it's not always easy for us to get momentum behind these issues because it lacks that public appeal that some other things do, but as we've said, it impacts all of us. So I wonder if you have any suggestions about how we can frame these issues in a way that strengthens that broader appeal to more Americans.
Well, it became really easy for us a couple years ago when we were facing the worst red tide that we'd seen in a generation. So, the public were up in arms, and they started to, although I think that there had been a major disservice by even science organizations and government in kind of not making the connection between red tide and anthropogenic pollution. People were making that connection because it was right in their face. That's pretty much accepted now. But it was just it was massive pollution. So the people that normally weren't getting involved were. Hopefully we won't have that situation again, but it sure made it easy to raise the profile. But I think it's just people gaining a better understanding of how clean water influences their daily lives, whether it be through beer, through clean water, which in my community, people move here and live here. It's the foundation of our economy, is our beautiful waterways, and to continue to make that connection so that people understand that it is critical environmental infrastructure. People get infrastructure, they get it, but they think roads. And so environmental infrastructure is key to the health of the communities. And these communities rely on clean waterways for their health. So that's a short answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I often am, I wonder at the disconnect between, like, you drive out on a road and somehow you know that somebody did a lot of work to be able to make that road happen. Whereas you turn on the tap for water and you just expect it to be there and for it to be clean and for it to have low impact. And obviously there's a lot of investment to be able to get that there. And so just always seeking better ways to drive that messaging home. So thanks for sharing that. Our next question is for Chris. You had mentioned just the struggle of municipalities owning water and having to make those investments themselves. I wonder if, looking at the Blue River project, if you can speak a little bit to the long-term benefits of in making those investments, knowing that down the road they will pay off. If you can speak to a little bit of that back-end payoff.
Well, I would leave it to my far more intelligent engineering counterparts to demonstrate the financial benefits of reducing the volume of treatable stormwater, in particular in a combined sewer system. That's just a direct lower the volume, lower the cost. Whereas we talked a little bit about the co-benefits, I can speak in this case in the investment priorities for workforce development. As a tenet of our maintenance contract for 3 years, we recruited and developed trained operations and maintenance professionals that were recruited from specifically the Kansas City, Missouri community. At which point we then took it a step further to try to emphasize targeting communities of concern or individuals with other barriers to employment, aside from a lack of training in green infrastructure maintenance. So the investments that we were able to secure through that contract were pretty substantial. The 3-year contract held a pretty high budget. But what we ended up seeing is that in addition to that just technical financial benefit of fewer combined sewer overflows to clean up, reduction in polluted wastewater to mitigate, or even worse, getting somebody like Justin's team on your case with a lawsuit because you're failing to comply. Avoiding that financial burden has been, of course, very huge. But I think that the not so tangible aspects of beneficial outcomes is really demonstrated in the Middle Blue project. We're talking about the enrichment of human life in a community and the development of individuals who may or may not have had access to a training and career path that is got promise for the future. As we all know, water infrastructure operations and maintenance is a very secure sector to be working in. We've got a lot of money that we're going to be spending in the near future. And I would always talk to my team about it. I say, hey, we're going to put $5 billion into this Kansas City infrastructure between now and the time that I'm 55. How much of that is going to be for us? You know, how much are we going to earn out of that investment? And that's a human quality of life benefit that has. I mean, obviously, you can be argued that any number of dollars should be put into co-benefits such as those.
Yeah, those are the priceless. That's priceless. You really can't put a dollar amount on that. And clean water, and we know that it's something that has universal support. It's just a matter of backing it up and putting the dollars there when the time comes in the infrastructure. Awesome, thank you. And our last question is for Frank. Frank, knowing that you spoke pretty well to the universal impacts of clean water, and particularly in that business aspect, I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more to what you're hearing from businesses broadly about the importance of clean water, and if this is in fact something that rises to the top for them. And I especially am interested in hearing, you had mentioned that obviously some of the smaller businesses don't have the capacity to be able to do those same fixes as some of the larger breweries and other companies who still depend on that clean water. What you're hearing from them as far as what they need to be able to continue to protect their water and the resource for their business.
Yeah, so good question. I mean, I think broadly speaking, it depends on the kind of business you are and what I guess there's three things. You could be producing a product that involves a lot of water, to which water really matters a lot, right? Like beer or, Coca-Cola. And number two, like, you could be talking about, providing water for your employees, just, you have the building workplace access to good water, will affect employee retention if employees, just kind of have a negative view of that. And then the third piece of that, I think, is municipal. So I know, for example, in North Carolina, there's been a lot of growth out of Raleigh to, a lot of expansion south towards Fuquay Varina. It's a local town here in Stanford. So, and Pittsboro. So I know Pittsboro and Fuquay Varina, they're blowing up, right? So Sanford is another town nearby that has extra water to start selling to Pittsboro and Fuquay. But Stanford's water is known to be contaminated with PFAS. And so Fuquay, Varina, and Pittsboro are having to make that decision as to, do they purchase that water? Do they have to add more infrastructure to clean it up? And knowing that there are going to be some business implications to that, where, if I'm a company and I'm just looking to relocate my headquarters or add an office space in, Pittsboro, and I know that the water sources there are a little bit questionable, I might just think twice, because it will affect, my employees, willingness to maybe go to work, or, they might even look elsewhere. So I think it really depends on the kind of company you're looking at, but everybody is affected. I would say that the companies that are producing some sort of product that involves the use of water are going to be the ones that are much more careful and much more diligent about, what's happening to that water, and they'll probably have a much louder voice because it's going to impact them more.
Yeah, as always, right? Great. I just thank you for answering that, and thank you all for participating. I want to open it up to see if there are any other questions. We have a lot of expertise on this call, so just want to see if anybody else has any questions or comments that they'd like to share.
I do. It's going to be for Chris, of course, just because I know the nature of his job now. I did want to mention the co-benefits that Chris was talking about earlier. I just really wanted to paint the picture of and emphasize that we put permeable sidewalks down in a neighborhood that had no sidewalks. So there was a huge amount of safety concerns of people just walking down streets because there weren't sidewalks. So just wanted to add that. But to change directions a little bit, Chris, I'd love to hear, because you now are an urban conservationist for a couple of counties on the other side of the state line in Kansas. And so I'm just curious, do you see much of a difference in green stormwater infrastructure between Kansas City, Missouri, and like how Missouri does it and compared to how Kansas does it, and anything that you're working on that's great and fun?
Yeah, no, there's a steep learning curve to switch sides of the state line. It is a very much more densely urban environment in Kansas City, Missouri. Johnson County, Kansas is where the suburban sprawl begins to sort of show itself. And then Miami County is even further south, but is got a quote bullseye on its back for the path of development. So seeing three different ways of approaching the same stormwater challenges, where in a more rural area, we're drawing directly from a federal reservoir for our drinking water in the Hillsdale Lake area. So the two communities that are contributing the most to the anthropogenic pollution of their own watershed are having now to deal with that as their populations are soaring, and they've really got an opportunity to get out ahead of the development model that ignores water quality impacts, specifically for residential development. In the more suburban areas, Johnson County is a contributor to the Blue River watershed in some areas, but additionally, they are across the board MS4 permit communities. So we're being obliged across the entire metro area to quite deliberately address stormwater, as Johnson County doesn't have that CSO problem, but they have a separate stormwater problem that has all the same impacts and comes from the same challenges as any other urban environment. You're talking increases in impervious surfaces. You're talking about uptick in pollutant loads, higher volumes of automobile traffic, heavier industry, and the environmental impacts that come with that. So in a sense, you could see it as reactive, interactive, and proactive. Maybe the more urban, the more reactive. Maybe.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
I just share with my North Carolina colleagues that I'm quite familiar with the water quality effects of Raleigh. Visiting Land Trust rally last fall, had a great chance to tour Trophy Brewing there. Little shout out to their initiatives for water quality, not only in their own product, but in the greater watershed of beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina. Shout out.
Glad to hear that.
Nice. Yeah, I lived in North Carolina in Asheville for a long time, so I was very excited about all of the investments that we were able to make in our local watersheds because of those companies being present. But of course, you shouldn't have to have a large brewery in your backyard to have clean water. So definitely excited to get those investments happening beyond the large companies. But I appreciated them.
Yeah, it's sad that it takes a large company to change it, doesn't it?
Indeed. Okay, any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Okay, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I know, as we said, it might not be the most exciting topic to tackle on a Friday afternoon, but I hope this has demonstrated how important it is, and that it can still be a positive issue that can demonstrate how we can work together to make all of our communities safer and better and thriving. So thank you all for that work, and